The Bible says it, and the thing is that it's not that the mythology is real. Mythology is fantasy, but that there are spirits behind this, and that is, the Bible says it. In Deuteronomy, in Psalm 106, it says when they worshipped these gods or these idols, it says they were worshiping the Shedim. Shedim is a Hebrew word, doesn't mean mythology. It means spirits, entities with will, with volition, with with consciousness. And so now when this word got translated into Greek, it became the word daimonia. We get the word demon from it. And when it goes into the New Testament, when Paul says the pagans or the Gentiles are worshiping the daimonia. So it's not just, so it means there's something behind them. So that's the first thing. Secondly, the entire world back then, everyone was given to gods. The gods were all over. But what changed that? Jesus changed it. The gospel coming into Western civilization, it basically was the biggest mass exorcism in human history. The gods were driven out, but if behind the gods were spirits, what happened to the spirits? Because gods can fade away, but spirits don't die. And for the final kind of clue to set this up is the parable of Jesus, where he talks about the spirit leaving the man. It goes looking for a place, goes back, says, I'm going back to the house, the man, finds the house empty, brings 7 other spirits, repossess the man, and it's worse than before. Now, people think it's just talking about a guy, but at the end, Jesus said, so it shall be with this generation. So here's the warning. The warning to America, the warning to our world is this. Any nation, any culture, any civilization that has been delivered of these things, and that's Western civilization, was delivered from these things, by the power of God, if it should ever turn away from God, empty itself of God, these spirits that were cast out of it are going to come back into the house. Well, we've been casting God out since the early 60s, and what has been happening, what we have been living through is a repossession. It is a repaganization. That's what's happening. And the same gods that were there in ancient Israel, that when they turned away from God, they're back. And that's what I open up in the Return of the Gods. Specifically, we can actually know which spirits are dealing with it. Once you see it, you can't unsee it.
And so when we look at, and you mentioned the 60s, a time reference here. So are you saying that perhaps there was either an elimination or a lessening of the influence of these quote-unquote gods, these spirits, prior to that time period, and then they have been, if you will, unleashed upon America? Or how does that work as you see it?
Yeah, well, they were driven out. When the gospel came into the culture, Judeo-Christian culture, they don't have the place that they had anymore. So they're in the corners, in the underground, and they're out there. But because the gospel is a preventative. The gospel is power. And so the thing is, once we started removing God, we started we'll just take God out of the school. We'll take God out of this. No big deal. Well, it's a big deal because we were opening the door. This is the warning Jesus gave. Look what happened when Germany turned away from God. It wasn't secular. It was demonic. It was Hitler. It was demonic. So now we've been turning away from God. And yes, we've opened the door. When you take away God, you're opening the door, because that's what's holding all this back. And that's what made us different from the pagan world. And actually in the Bible, it speaks of certain gods that when Israel turned away from God, basically took over the culture. And I call it, in the Return of the Gods, I call it the Dark Trinity. Yeah. And these are 3, and the same ones are back.